In 1972, a group of researchers at MIT concluded that society was on its way to a complete collapse and that by 2040, today's modern world would end in absolute failure. This shocking prediction brought in a lot of attention, and a follow-up study was introduced by KPMG. Instead of finding evidence to dismiss the previous findings, the KPMG study shocked the world by declaring that we were already ahead of schedule in this prediction. Societies, or advanced civilizations as we know them, have existed for around 10,000 years. During this era of Earth's history, many rose to great power, and just as many collapsed, leaving only residues of their territories. Historians have always worked to analyze the specific reasons leading to the demise of great civilizations, and while most details remain unknown, we do see repeating patterns in the various collapses. Essentially, all determining factors leading to a collapse fall into 4 different broad categories. They are political issues, social issues, environmental issues, and economic issues. Because this is largely a finance channel, in today's video we're going to be focusing on the economic portion of this equation. In nearly all instances of societal collapse throughout history, some sort of economic issues developed as a precursor to the eventual failure. The infamous Roman Empire took over 300 years to fizzle out, but you can almost track the demise perfectly by looking into the failure of its currency. During its peak, the Roman denarius was 4.5 grams of pure silver, a showcase of power and wealth. As the empire declined, so did its currency. By slowly decreasing the purity of its coinage, Roman leaders were able to make more silver coins with the same value. By the end of the empire, a denarius was essentially a piece of aluminum foil. It contained only 0.5% silver, and soon prices across the empire skyrocketed 1,000%. By 476, the Western Roman Empire had ceased to exist, and its currency and economic situation was a clear reason for its demise. But what is the point of comparing today's modern society with those in the past? After all, as much as we complain about our world today, we find ourselves living in the most prosperous era of human history. War is at an all-time low, and nation-states, even those who supposedly hate each other, find themselves more integrated than ever. Comparing the Roman Empire to today's Western world is like comparing a horse to a plane. Our empires are now thousands of times more advanced than those in the past. So why was the KPMG study so pessimistic about our futures? What kinds of variables were they looking at to make this determination that society will collapse in 2040? Well, the study has its basis in system dynamics, and without boring you to death, this is essentially a way researchers use stocks, flows, and feedback loops to model complex systems. In its most simple form, it's a way of simulating the world. Now, this is easier said than done. Predicting the future is extremely difficult even when you narrow things down to one simple game. For an example, only a select few can beat NFL lines in Vegas, and this is just one isolated game that is millions of degrees less complex than the world. Change one variable and the system reacts and changes the outcome significantly. But regardless, it turns out you can get a pretty good idea of the future by looking at 5 major variables. That is population, industrial output, food productivity, available resources, and pollution. Understanding these variables is the key to understanding the path ahead, but even doing so, you have to make assumptions about the future. Holding certain things constant that we don't fully understand is often a massive issue in modeling. For example, how do you account for innovation? It can be presumed that with higher population, there will be more innovation. And with more innovation, there is higher productivity, but this isn't always true. Not everything in life is linear, even if it appears so in our lifetimes. We've all heard of Moore's Law, the idea that the number of transistors in a dense chip doubles about every 2 years. This has been true for decades, but we will soon approach a physical limit to this number and it will flatten out. There is nothing saying that innovation may do the same, and how you model it will make all the difference in the final result. So how did the study account for this, and finally, what did it conclude? Well, researchers essentially accounted for multiple scenarios. They ran the simulation with various assumptions including flat innovation, exponential innovation, and linear innovation. Not only that, they also ran them using other variable adjustments including low birth rate, high resource discovery, low resource discovery, and so forth. They then took all of these results and averaged them out. Just like with any study of this kind, the results also fell into a range, but surprisingly, it wasn't very wide. All of the conclusions seem to point to one thing. But before I reveal it, I would like everyone to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video thus far. I'm at 88,000 subscribers and would love to hit that 100K mark before the end of this year. Now back to the study. All of the conclusions essentially showed a significant decline starting in the year 2040. I'm not going to go over each one of their major conclusions, but what can be said about the study is that it's a fair and comprehensive look into the major variables affecting society. One of the most important outlooks is that technology needs to keep up with the rise in population, and thus innovation needs to keep pace as well. For example, maybe in the future you won't need a single car for each living person, but instead a car could be shared and provide an even better experience than today due to automation and AI. But maybe that's not the case and things don't evolve as expected. This is where we get into something called the business as usual scenario. It basically assumes that pollution continues its trajectory straight up, and most importantly, food production slows, causing famine in poor countries and a massive drop in birth rates among rich countries. This leads to a serious lack of young workers, leading to industrial output collapsing, which in turn pushes everything else down with it. This is the ultimate apocalyptic scenario, and it's not that far from reality given today's circumstances. Predicting how or why things end may turn out to be impossible, but given the way the world is headed, many people, including optimists, have concluded that we have surpassed the apex of this civilization. One of those is Warren Buffett's right-hand man, Charlie Munger, who famously shocked the crowd with an amazing answer pertaining to the future of our society. Take a listen to the differences between him and Buffett when it comes to analyzing our futures.
But in terms of the basic economics of the country, your children are going to live better than you live, and your grandchildren are going to live better than your children live. And we do not focus on macro factors. Charlie?
Well, I agree with you that the economics of the country are probably going to increase for a considerable period ahead. But I suspect that in very important ways, we are at or near the apex of a great civilization.
You heard it here first, folks. If you leave the NCB, nuclear, chemical, biological, but I do not feel that way, but
So there is Mr. Munger in 2005 essentially saying that this is it. It's about as good as it gets. From here, it's all downhill. Whether you agree or not, we cannot push away the dangers facing the future of the Earth. One of the biggest issues that we have yet to talk about is the rapidly increasing amount of automation taking over the world. This is a topic that touches on some uncomfortable truths. Earlier in the century, most jobs were fit even for the most uneducated people. It didn't matter what your IQ or energy levels were, all that mattered was that you could physically move around. Most positions were built around repetitive physical labor. Today, we have a society where the jobs have changed, but the people have not. Warren Buffett explains this perfectly in the following clip. It's probably one of his most controversial statements. If you read between the lines, you can hear exactly what he's saying.
there was a great article, and this applies to an earlier question. There was a very good article in Forbes about one issue ago that showed the occupational profile of the U.S. At a couple of different intervals going back to 1900. And one problem you can see just by looking at that profile is that if you assume 20% of the bottom 20%, however you measure it in terms of employability, whether it's measured by IQ or interest in working or energy level or whatever you want to do, they fit very well most of the jobs that were available 100 years ago. In other words, you could do most of the jobs, of which there were many, with relatively unimpressive mental abilities. And as jobs have changed, the profile of people hasn't changed. So there are more people that end up on the short end. Now, the good part of that is the society produces so much more that it can take care of those people one way or another. Now, the trick is to take care of them and make them not only feel, but be productive and be part of the act. And we've got enough product to do that, but the country turns out way more output than 50 or 100 years ago. We're not perfect at figuring out how to make the bottom 20 or 30% in terms of abilities fit a new changing job profile. I really recommend you look at that Forbes magazine because it.
So essentially, we have an issue where the best jobs require highly skilled workers, and there aren't enough of these jobs to feed everyone. Therefore, we need to figure out a way to include those on the outside of this skilled sphere. How this can be done is the question of the decade, and where we're headed from here if we don't change anything is answered by the study. As always, thank you guys for watching. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed.